Hi there, and welcome back, or welcome to Tiny Teaspoons. Just want to say thank you so much to those of you who have watched my previous two videos. If you're a returning subscriber, special thank you to you. I'm so flattered that even one person would want to be a subscriber. The fact that I now have 21, which I know sounds silly because there are people on this platform that have millions of subscribers, but really it's all relative. So 21 subscribers is super exciting to me, and I want to say thank you. Today I want to talk a little bit about a little bit of a pivot. I was inspired by another creator. Her name is Brittany who posted a video about Gabbie Hanna. And I think she had some resistance, or, she really took her time to decide to ultimately create a video about Gabbie Hanna. Brittany, she does her research. She has a very interesting perspective. She really likes to zoom out of a situation and get lessons from a situation. So she does less of the this is what this person did, and this is what that person did, and this is, this particular situation. She admits that this is not her side of YouTube. And so it's really interesting to hear her, the observations that she makes from that perspective. I really, really like her. Sometimes she says things that challenge me a little bit. Something that I do like about her is that she's very authentic in the things that she says, which is refreshing. She sometimes offends people a little bit. She says she's not PC, and she doesn't say that, from the a conservative perspective of I'm just gonna, you're all snowflakes, or she doesn't try to deliberately offend people to make a point. But she says what's on her mind, and she believes what she believes because she believes it and not because it's popular. And I find that authenticity really refreshing and needed in situations like this. And so I had been wanting to create a video kind of similar in that there are grander lessons that we can learn from YouTube drama or social media drama. I think it's really important to be critical of the media that we consume as a society. I get concerned that, sometimes we make these deep dives into drama, into these situations, and that we might be picking up lessons that we're not aware of that could actually be eroding our relationships. And it's, I want to defend my concerns because I can imagine maybe somebody listening to that would be like, that's a stretch. I think people know better. I don't think anybody's sitting in front of their computer and being like, oh, because Gabbie Hanna did this toxic thing, I'm going to do it too. I think that our unconscious minds are a little bit more complex than that. And that's why there's a whole world of film critique, critique of TV shows, critique of media, because I don't think we're always consciously aware of the lessons that we learn from the media around us. I actually used to work with young kids, young middle school age. If you remember that age, 11 to 13, that's when we were forming our identities and our norms, and really, our social groups were so fraught. And this was a few years ago, and I remember a lot of the work that I did was resolving conflicts around social media, because this is kind of uncharted territory, the things that we are learning from new media. We are, I think, really starting to grasp the significance of the certain rituals around media. And I worry because the audiences that are most involved in the dramas surrounding Gabbie Hanna, they're young. And so there's a part of me that hopes that there can be enough examination about the lessons that we learn from these situations that we can prevent people from learning toxic behaviors. I personally believe that as a society, we need to work on our approach to personal relationships. I think we need to recalibrate our relationship with social media. I think we need to learn to be a little bit more deliberate and put more work into all of our relationships, not just romantic, but our platonic relationships as well. I think friendship is what makes life worth living. And so this is the premise of this video, is that I want to turn the conversation, really zoom out and turn the conversation into basically what not to do versus what to do in a friendship. watching these things go round and round is heartbreaking. And so how can we be critical about what we're consuming so that we don't accidentally pick up some really unhealthy lessons? So I'm going to, before I dive in, I have 4 points. Before I dive in, I'm going to say that, much like Brittany, I don't really subscribe to PC or to be performatively woke. I might identify with the left side of the political spectrum, but I also will keep it really honest and keep it really real. And if there are points of disagreement, I think there are really civil, productive ways to discuss that. But the funny thing is, in one of my past videos, I took the same approach, and someone accused me of being paid by Gabbie Hanna and called me disgusting. And there's really just there's not much conversation that can be had about that, right? If you're gonna, throw labels around and just characterize me as a person because of some opinions that I'm going back and forth on, there's nothing that we can get out of that. So I invite conversation, but I'm not particularly interested in engaging in kind of juvenile arguments like that. I might clap back every now and then because I think people, need to be clapped back at. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump into my first point, and that is that people are usually not fully angels and they're not usually fully demons, right? Black and white thinking is such a pervasive issue in friendships, in toxic friendships. And that's something that we've seen in these internet dramas again and again and again, is that somebody sees a person in their life as a villain, and because they have decided that all this person does is evil and all of their intents are malicious, they aren't able to see the shades of gray, and they aren't able to see the opportunities where we could resolve some issues, right? If you only see someone as evil, someone who is supposed to be a friend, I'm not talking about abusers, right? And I will talk a little bit about abuse in my next point. When we're talking about friends that we're having issues with, black and white thinking is really toxic. Without shades of gray, we're not able to be critical of ourselves, and we're not able to stop and empathize with other people. Very rarely, I'm not going to say never, very rarely are people approaching a situation with the intent to be shitty. That's just the truth. We do things that make sense to us at the time. And if you decide that somebody is purely evil, you're not able to engage with their perspective. That's something that comes up again and again because it's a trope of entertainment, right? This is entertainment. At the end of the day, these are YouTube videos, and a lot of them in this particular situation, a lot of them were monetized. So there is an incentive to ascribe to tropes because, and I mentioned this in a previous video, algorithms don't reward measured and balanced thinking. They reward crappy behavior, frankly, because that's entertaining, because it's like watching a train wreck. And so watch these videos and look at these situations go down and recognize that this cannot apply to how you decide to see people. If you decide to ascribe to black and white thinking, your social life and your social circle will take a toll on those two things. So that's the one thing that I challenge all of us to do moving forward in relationships, is be willing to look at shades of gray, right? I'm generally a good person, but sometimes I engage in toxic behavior because I get insecure, because I get scared, because I get sad, because my traumas come up. I'm not all bad, and I'm also not all good either, right? And that friend that really hurt me, that ex that really hurt me, we might not be for each other at the end of the day, but I take power away from myself if I'm not willing to see the complexity of my behavior and their behavior. So my next point is the importance of using social media appropriately when it comes to relationships. That's, I think, the thing that's most relevant to YouTube drama, is that, again, who are the algorithms? What are the algorithms going to reward, right? Which YouTube videos are going to make the money? Which ones are going to get the clicks? It's the ones with the DMs screenshotted. It's the ones with the exposes. It's the ones with the like video evidence. It's the situations where an intimate moment was made public that people are most interested in viewing. And so those are the things that are going to show up most frequently in your recommended videos. And in real life, that is not the way to handle conflict. I grew up on Facebook. Facebook became big when I was in high school, and God, did I pay the price for it, because this idea of airing things out publicly, of us posting substatus, or like we call it subtweeting today because Facebook's kind of dead, but back in my day, like our toxic behavior was to post a cryptic Facebook status, right? We've all seen that, and even more of us have probably done it than we'd like to admit. But that is not, we're not teenagers anymore. And when you expose private moments that don't necessarily need to be exposed to the public as a form of vengeance, as a form of as a form of venting, as a catharsis, I'm not saying those aren't things that you have a right to want, but when you turn private things public, you erode another person's trust. People need to trust that you will handle a conflict maturely, and you need to be able to trust a friend to handle a conflict maturely. And it is not mature to tell an entire audience about another person's behavior, even when it's cryptic, because I assure you, half the time people know that your status is about them, half the time they don't. And those are really, really confusing odds, right? 1 out of 2 chance that the person is going to receive the message that you're sending. And there's never a good result. If they don't receive the message that you're sending, that's not a good result because they're not hearing you. If they do receive the message that you're sending, they're not going to trust you because you could have gone to them directly and you chose not to. This is the thing that worries me about the kiddos out there. I got called into so many situations where people used Snapchat. Snapchat is hell for anybody who works in the school system because they disappear. So you don't have evidence to be able to reflect back and be like, that wasn't okay. But Snapchat as a company does help school counselors with that a little bit. And sometimes they are able to bring back that content. Pro tip for those of you who work in that system. But this is the kind of thing that scares me, is that if that's what these kids are learning now and they don't get lessons on how to manage relationships and conflict, they're going to continue like shading each other on Snapchat, and relationships are never going to move to a place of maturity and growth, right? When you're able to approach your friend and you're able to address something that upset you, or vice versa, they're able to approach you, it allows you to reach a really beautiful place in your friendship and in your relationships. If you can get over that hurdle, your friendship is so much stronger for it. If you can't get into a conflict without finding a healthy way to get through it, it doesn't bode well for the future of a relationship. And so I think maybe that might be one of my biggest, most important points today, is use social media to your benefit, not to your detriment. I'm not anti-social media. I just think that it has the potential to really destroy the way we approach friendships and relationships. And on that note, don't let social media speak for you. A read receipt is not the same thing as a conversation. Seeing who watched your story on Instagram is not the same thing as a conversation. An Instagram like is not the same thing as a conversation. I've been in situations that have really frustrated me because somebody will send me a message, I'll read it, I plan on responding when I have a minute, don't have the minute now, and they get offended because they got the read receipt and they decided that I'm deliberately ignoring them. I've been in situations like that, and unfortunately, they're predictors of an eroded friendship, because I don't like it when people decide what my intentions are off of something so inscrutable as a like or a read receipt or a watch story list, if you will. My third point is actually, I'm going to steal a book title for this point. It's called Conflict is Not Abuse. I'm going to say that one more time, and I'm going to put the title onto the screen. Conflict is Not Abuse. It's a book that I really recommend by Sarah Schulman. Sarah Schulman wrote this book to address a trend that I feel like she saw, that she feels like she saw, of scapegoating, of instead of engaging in difficult conversations and leaning into difficult conversation, of painting people as villains and of throwing around the word abuse. Instead of engaging in self-criticism, instead of engaging in courageous, back and forth with people. Yes, it is really uncomfortable when you're in conflict with someone. When somebody does something to offend you or hurt you, it's really uncomfortable. It is so destructive to throw around words like abuse and gaslighting unnecessarily. And I want to be really careful in how I say this. I don't want anyone to misinterpret me as wanting to downplay the reality of abuse and abusive relationships, right? Abuse is its own category. Abuse is about power. Abuse is about degradation. Abuse is about taking away someone's dignity. That's very different than this person is hurting my feelings and doing something that offends me. It's not always, I think that that's a whole video in and of itself. But I think we have a good knowledge inherently, instinctually, that the person we're having issues with is not our abuser. I think if we look within, if we take a second and breathe through a frustrating situation and engage in self-criticism or engage in self-reflection, it doesn't have to be criticism, we can remind ourselves this person is not necessarily abusing me. We are in a conflict. Let's see what can come out of this conflict. Either I recognize that some of the things that I was thinking were not lining up with reality, or I feel even stronger in my convictions as a result of this conflict. But that's what we see in these YouTube conflicts, is the repeated labeling of someone as an abuser and a gaslighter. I learned about the concept of gaslighting kind of late into my college years, and it was such a useful concept to be aware of. The idea that somebody will deliberately and almost strategically make you doubt your reality. That's a really powerful thing to know and be aware of, and awareness is so empowering. But it's been frustrating to watch the internet perceive any sort of discrepancy as gaslighting, right? If my friend, let's say my friend makes fun of my haircut, right? And it hurts my feelings and I don't like it. And I tell her, dude, I feel like you're kind of being an asshole to me. Like, can you please stop with the hair? And she responds with, oh, I didn't feel like I was making fun of you. I just come from a family of people who we show our love to each other by teasing each other. And you had made fun of your haircut. So I thought it was okay for me to make fun of my haircut. That's not necessarily gaslighting. That's a difference in perception and reality, but there is an opportunity for me to respond and say, I get it. Thanks for explaining that to me. Could you stop though? Like, I appreciate that you said that. I now realize what your intentions were, but I'm feeling like I just need a little bit more. I'm feeling iffy about myself lately, or I just like, that's not the kind of thing that I like. I need people to build me up when it comes to my personal appearance. So no more about the haircut. Love you. Thank you. Have a great day. That could be how it goes, or we could realize that our senses of humor are too incompatible for us to maintain the kind of relationship that we've had. We're moving on with more information that way than if I were to just say, you don't think that you're making fun of me? You're a gaslighter. It wouldn't have benefited me as much if that's the approach that I took. Now, if this was a person who repeatedly, over and over and over again, downplayed my frustrations over and over and over again, denied me of the way that I feel, we'd be having a different conversation, of course. But conflict is not necessarily a power imbalance, which is a really big part of abuse. Conflict is an opportunity. And so I think that that's definitely another really big piece that our generation could work on, is resisting the urge to label people. Again, this ties into the good versus evil thing. To be willing to see shades of gray and engage in those uncomfortable conversations. The last point that I'm going to make is about normalizing the way that friendships change, grow, morph over time. what I mean by that is that I think sometimes we are fed this idea that friendships are supposed to look a certain way all the time with everyone across time. And I think that that actually contributes to a lot of frustration, a lot of unrealistic expectations. We talk a lot about how, for example, Disney programmed us to have unrealistic expectations of men, of romance, of marriage. Of course, that's kind of the stereotype, right? Like, oh, we all have unrealistic expectations because we believe a prince is going to come save us. Absolutely very true. Something we don't talk about as much that I wish we would is how media also has programmed us with unrealistic expectations of friendship. We think that every girlfriend in our life is supposed to be the girlfriend that comes over when you're drunk and holds your hair back while you throw up in the toilet and is stroking your forehead in the morning when you have a hangover. Not every friend is going to be that friend. And that friend might be that friend for a while, and they might move across the country, and so the nature of your relationship changes. That's not necessarily a bad thing. We grow, we learn, life circumstances, move us around into different places. And so normalize the idea that you might lose touch for a little while. You might need to recalibrate your expectations of one another. You always have a right to ask for more, right? Lately, you haven't been texting me back as much. I miss us being able to talk. Can we schedule a weekly FaceTime? Would that work with your schedule? Right? It's not necessarily, you don't force something to be a certain way when it comes to friendships. Have a sense of acceptance, kind of like this Zen approach of it is what it is, when it comes to relationships as they change and they grow. When you accept people for who they are and what they're able to bring to the table, they also do that for you more often. And that's the beautiful thing about all this, is that you can model what you want from other people. It works so much more than you ever think it would. When you give the world, when you give the people in your life what you want, what you probably want is consistency. What you probably want is for people not to flake on you. What you probably want is for people to cut you some slack. When you give people those things, you get them back. And so give people grace to grow, to be who they are as life changes them, because life is going to change you too. And there is absolutely a way to break away from people who might not fit in your life anymore gracefully. I heard a saying recently, and that was, don't date someone that you wouldn't want to break up with. Something along those lines. Don't marry someone that you wouldn't want to go through a divorce with. And of course, that's really hard to adhere to because you can't tell the future. But it is a really good predictor of the health of a relationship, platonic, romantic, whatever it may be, that if you're able to separate from them civilly, that you can imagine you two having a conflict and having to separate from each other civilly. I think that actually really bodes well and creates really strong relationships and strong friendships. So those were my 4 points. I appreciate if you decided to stick around. I hope that you found it informative. I'd love to hear what other things you might add to this particular list. This is the stuff that I live for, is human relationships. It's the stuff that I find most interesting because, like I said in the beginning, relationships we have with other people are what make life worth living. It's the love that we share for one another that makes life worth living, and love grows in a certain context and in a certain environment. So I would really, really be excited and interested to hear what some of you might have to say about this topic. And I definitely am open to maybe some disagreements. And if you have any ideas on maybe other topics for me to cover, I would love to hear it. I will link Brittany's video. Please make sure to watch it. Really like her. I think you have a lot to gain from her perspective. And have a great rest of your day.